We are coming off a wild week 2 fantasy football week, man, and so many things have changed. I mean, you're seeing guys like Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell literally come out of nowhere. Nico Collins in that group as well. So we're starting to get some real information on who the top guys are going to be moving forward. So today we need to go through the top 30 wide receiver rankings for week 3 fantasy football. And I will also provide my underdog favorite sleeper start of the week in week 3 fantasy football at the end of the rankings. So make sure to watch till the very end, and please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to show support for the channel. So let's go ahead and just dive right into tier 1 right now. This tier right here, it speaks for themselves. These guys are the 2 top dogs at the wide receiver position in fantasy football right now. There's no question about it. I mean, Justin Jefferson, to kick it off at number 1, this guy literally, let's just go through what he's done, man. 25 targets, has over 300 reception yards, 19.5 fantasy points per game, and he's got no touchdowns, and he's still the wide receiver 4 on the year. This guy is outrageously good at fantasy football. He's also taking on the worst passing defense in week 3. So this is going to be a feast for Justin Jefferson in week 3. Now, number 2, I mean, Tyreek Hill, literally just as good of a situation. And I'll be honest here, the Denver Broncos defense, which he's taken on this week at home in Miami, I kept saying that Denver's defense is better than people think. I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong. They are not good. They just gave up 30 plus points to the Washington Commanders. This is not a good defense. This is a matchup that Tyreek Hill could take advantage of. And I also said last week that Tyreek Hill was going to get a tougher week this week because Bill Belichick is known for taking away your number 1 option. And that's essentially what happened. He put a cap on what Tyreek Hill could do. I don't think that's happening this week against Denver in Miami this week. Moving down to our next tier right here, we've got a great tier as well. I mean, these are all guys that I am so happy with in my wide receiver 1 every single week in fantasy football. Starting out with Stephon Diggs taking on the Washington Commanders in Washington this week. So obviously Stephon Diggs had a bit of a down game in week 2. I mean, this was a blowout win for the Buffalo Bills. And Stephon Diggs was not irrelevant, but he was having a down fantasy game for his standards, right? So obviously, week 1 was great. Week 2 was a down week. A lot of people have been really kind of concerned about Stephon Diggs, and even dating back to before the season started. And I think that honestly, it's kind of just much ado about nothing. And to put it the best way, remember what Antonio Brown did in his final year in Pittsburgh when there was all kinds of drama there as well. Antonio Brown was still a fantastic player. So even if, in the off chance that Stephon Diggs is as crazy as Antonio Brown is, which I don't think he is, he's going to be fine this year. He's still got a top-tier quarterback. This is a very good team. They just need the right weeks. I think they're going to be just fine this week. Number 4, Davante Adams taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday night in Las Vegas this week. Davante Adams obviously left the game a little bit early with a concussion last week. So he got his concussion test, he ended up good to go, and Josh McDaniels, the head coach, actually said that he is ready to go this week as well. So all signs point that he's going to play. He had a great bounce back game in week 2, as I predicted last week. Davante Adams is going to be just fine. He's a continuous must start in fantasy football. Amon-Ra St. Brown also in the same tier here, taking on the Atlanta Falcons in Detroit this week. I love this guy. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown is fantastic. Only concern I have is that he did come away with a calf injury. So we don't know exactly the full extent. I am recording this on Monday night at 1 a.m. And the last piece of news that I have is that he has the injury and they don't know what's happening next. So he may or may not play, but if he does play, he's absolutely inside the top 5. Keenan Allen also in the same tier here. Keenan Allen is just the guy that everybody forgets about. And it's because he's obviously in his 30s. I mean, that's the reason that people are forgetting about him. You can't forget about what this guy does and his importance to this offense. Justin Herbert loves targeting Keenan Allen. That's just the reality. Keenan Allen has been tremendous through 2 weeks in fantasy football, and he was especially tremendous in week 2. I think it just continues on. This is a great matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings pass defense is not good at all. I love this matchup right here for Keenan Allen. Now, dropping down to the next tier right here, we've got Devonta Smith taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa Bay. This is the crazy thing, right? Like, Devonta Smith really does look like the wide receiver 1 in Philadelphia this year. And everybody knew, like, coming into the year, like, this is A.J. Brown. This is A.J. Brown. That's the wide receiver 1. Devonta Smith has been great. Now, what I will say is that the targets still don't align with a guy who's getting consistent wide receiver 1 fantasy finishes. So I will say be a little bit careful with this one particularly, and also because A.J. Brown is going to pop at some point. But Devonta Smith is clearly a great star right now in fantasy football. You got to continue to ride the wave with him right now. And then CeeDee Lamb in the same tier here, taking on the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona. I mean, this is the matchup of the week, right? Like, Dallas is going to absolutely beat the brakes off the Arizona Cardinals this week in Arizona. And that's my only concern with this matchup in particular, is that Dallas gets up to an early lead, and then they just don't, you need to throw the ball that much, and CeeDee Lamb just doesn't end up having that much involvement. That's the only worry I have, kind of like a Giants situation in week 1, but this is still a great option here. Never bench CeeDee Lamb. He's going to get it going when they're in more competitive games this year. Number 9, also in the tier, Ja'Marr Chase, taking on the Los Angeles Rams at home in Cincinnati. Obviously, this is the guy that everyone's worried about, right? Ja'Marr Chase is literally becoming like a buy low guy. I mean, I included him on my buy low trade targets video on Monday. And honestly, like, I think it's just, in the leagues I play in, it seems a little outrageous, but I understand that every league is different. And Ja'Marr Chase was going in the first round. A lot of people get really, really scared at week 2 if they're 0-2. And newsflash, a lot of people who have Ja'Marr Chase right now are 0-2 because he was their top pick and he's been a nothing burger this season so far. Ja'Marr Chase is going to be fine. This Cincinnati Bengals offense is going to continue to get better. Even though they didn't win this past week in week 2, they looked better by a long shot than they did against the Cleveland Browns. The only problem here is that Joe Burrow did re-aggravate that calf injury. So if he does miss, Ja'Marr Chase is going to be a worse fantasy option. Probably drops into like the lower 20s on my list in this particular week, but we'll address that when that time comes. Number 10, we've got Chris Olave taking on the Green Bay Packers in Green Bay. So obviously, since I'm filming this on Monday night, well after all the Monday night games, I saw what Chris Olave did on Monday Night Football. And let me tell you, if you didn't see his wild catch to basically seal the win, go back and watch it. It was so cool to watch, man. Chris Olave's a stud. And what you can see on the screen here is his stat line. He's almost got 200 yards, averages 13.4 fantasy points per game through the first 2 weeks. People are a little disappointed with him because he doesn't have a touchdown. Let me tell you this, the touchdowns are going to come. The volume is there. Everything else is there. The touchdowns will come. This guy is too explosive not to score. Continue to trot out Chris Olave on a weekly basis with full confidence. A.J. Brown at number 11, taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa Bay this week. Love A.J. Brown, man. I love trading low for him. He was my main guy that I was saying to buy low on my Monday buy low trade targets video, and I love it. Like, I have been sending offers for A.J. Brown all week already, and it's only Tuesday that I'm filming this, right? So I love A.J. Brown. I mean, this is a situation where he's had a bad couple of games, but when you look at it, he's still getting targeted. He's still averaging 8 targets per game in the last 2 weeks. And honestly, if you watch that Thursday night game against Minnesota, A.J. Brown had a touchdown called back. So it's not like he's literally just irrelevant in this offense. Very similar situation to Ja'Marr Chase. This guy was a call from getting a touchdown last week, and his outlook right now and everybody's perspective on him would be much different if that touchdown counted. So there's a lot of situations here that people look at with A.J. Brown and they're very nervous. I'm not nervous at all. A.J. Brown is going to pop at some point, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's as soon as this week. Dropping down in the next tier, we've got Deebo Samuel kicking off the tier here, taking on the Giants here in New York this week. Look, this is the crazy thing about Deebo, is the rushing monster came out again in week 2. That was what we want to see with Deebo Samuel. That was when he was great in 2021. When he gets the rushing opportunities, Deebo Samuel sets himself apart in fantasy football. And I think that as a receiver, I really don't think he's actually the same player as he was in 2021. I don't think he's as fast, as explosive. I just don't think that's who he is. But I do think that if he can continue to get this kind of volume, Deebo Samuel is going to be a top tier wide receiver 2 option in fantasy football moving forward. They're going to embarrass the Giants this week. That's not the issue here. The issue here is, can he keep up the rushing volume like he did in week 2? Calvin Ridley at number 13, taking on the Houston Texans at home in Jacksonville. This was a down week for Calvin Ridley. And like I said, I publicly took my L on Calvin Ridley last week. So I'm already out there in the open that I acknowledge I was wrong on Calvin Ridley before the season started. Calvin Ridley is a very good player. And the problem is with this particular week in general, Calvin Ridley had a down week, but he still had 8 targets in this game. Calvin Ridley is going to be fine. Like, he didn't just like disappear out of this game. And I'm way less worried about him than I am with Christian Kirk, because even though Christian Kirk had the better game, Christian Kirk was basically irrelevant in week 1. Calvin Ridley was not irrelevant this past week. Still had 8 targets. He's going to be totally fine this week against the Houston Texans. Puka Nacua on the list at number 14 at the Cincinnati Bengals this week. Literally, the guy came out of nowhere. This is the man that came out of absolutely nowhere, man. This guy broke some records in week 2. I mean, he's been that good to start the season. And honestly, I might have to call an L on myself again for what my take was on the Los Angeles Rams for the season. They look like a legitimate team right now, and I thought they were going to be one of the worst teams in all of the NFL. They've got some young players, and Puka Nacua is leading the way, and it's an utter shock to me, man. I don't know if he's going to keep this level up. I mean, this is an unreal pace he's on right now, so I don't think that he's going to keep that up exactly, but he belongs in the top 15 right now. I mean, that's the simple answer to this, and the matchup does not scare me at all. Dropping down to 15, I've got T. Higgins in that same matchup versus the Los Angeles Rams at home, just a tier below him. And really, T. Higgins is a guy that was on my buy low trade target video before week 2, after week 1. I said T. Higgins is a prime buy low candidate. I hope you bought him. I hope you bought him and you played him right away because he was excellent in week 2. T. Higgins is back. I said it then, I say it now. There's nothing to worry about with this Cincinnati Bengals offense as long as Joe Burrow's there. And of course, that's the problem. Joe Burrow re-aggravated that calf injury. We'll see what happens, man. But if he's healthy, you continue to play T. Higgins with full and complete confidence, man. Mike Evans at 16, taking on the Philadelphia Eagles at home in Tampa Bay this week. I honestly, the thing about Mike Evans is that obviously he's been great. I mean, he's the wide receiver 2 on the season right now, and he's averaging 20.9 fantasy points per game. Mike Evans has been spectacular this season already with Baker Mayfield. It's come as a shock to me, I'll tell you that right now. I think it's going to come back down to earth this week. And the reason that I say that is because this matchup against Philadelphia, this is not going to just affect Mike Evans. This is going to affect all of Tampa Bay's offense because Tampa Bay's offensive line is not going to be able to contain Philadelphia's front 7. Philadelphia's front 7 is going to get after Baker, and Baker is not a good quarterback under pressure. That's going to cause some problems here for Baker, and as a result, will cause problems for Mike Evans. I'm lower on Mike Evans this week, but I do still acknowledge, just from a target perspective and how dominant of a role he's on, you got to continue to put Mike Evans out there until he busts for you. Number 17, I've got Brandon Ayuk of the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Giants on that Thursday night game. So Brandon Ayuk is in a little bit of a weird situation this week. He's coming into the week with a shoulder injury that he suffered on Sunday, and he was listed as a did not practice on Monday's estimated report from a shoulder injury. So this is a situation where they're playing on Thursday. Brandon Ayuk very well may not go. Like I said, filming this at 1 a.m. on Monday morning. I don't know enough at the time of this recording to decide whether or not he's going to play. If he plays, he belongs here at number 17. If he does not play, obviously, you can't play him. Jalen Waddle at 18 here, taking on the Denver Broncos at home in Miami, man. So honestly, it kind of feels a little bit weird to have him this low. I mean, we've had like these breakout guys like Puka Nacua rising up the board. Mike Evans rising up the board for me. I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening this early on in the season that are pushing great wide receiver options like Jalen Waddle down. And Jalen Waddle is just, my problem with Jalen Waddle has always been that he's never been a target guy since his rookie season. With Tyreek Hill, he's not the target guy. I mean, you can see he's only got 11 targets through 2 weeks. That's not a very high number. So I love Jalen Waddle. I love him a lot. I think he's a great player in fantasy football. But this is going to be a guy that's going to be a little bit boomer bust a little bit. Bust in the sense of like, he'll have like a 10-point game. He's not going to bust for you. But he's not always going to give you a 30-point week, but he can do it. Jalen Waddle in this matchup versus Denver, he's going to be just fine. But the thing to watch for here is obviously on that Sunday night game versus the Patriots, he entered into the concussion protocol. So he is uncertain to go for week 3. That's what we need to monitor throughout the week. If he plays, I'm very confident playing him though. Michael Pittman Jr. at number 19, taking on the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore this week. I said it last week. I am all in on Michael Pittman and Anthony Richardson on this Indianapolis Colts team. So all in. He had another great week in fantasy football in week 2. This guy, honestly, is just in a great situation. Great offensive-minded head coach. Quarterback is playing very, very well. The problem here is, will Anthony Richardson play? If you are not aware, Anthony Richardson left the Houston game early in week 2 due to a concussion. He did not return, and early reports are that Anthony Richardson is actually not going to play. So if he doesn't play, Michael Pittman drops down to like the top 30 range. But still, Michael Pittman is actually, I believe, going to have a really good year this year because remember, this is a contract year for Michael Pittman. This guy wants to show out so he can get paid over the offseason. Number 20, Amari Cooper taking on the Tennessee Titans in Cleveland this week. Obviously coming off the loss here, one of the things that was encouraging for the Browns, aside obviously from the bad Nick Chubb injury, was that Amari Cooper played very well through a groin injury that he suffered on Saturday. So I was really impressed watching Amari Cooper tonight in this particular game. I love him this week against an awful Tennessee pass defense that literally cannot defend the pass against anybody. Totally fine with playing Amari Cooper, even if he's limited this week in practice. Tyler Lockett taking on the Carolina Panthers in Seattle this week. Dude, this guy just keeps proving everybody wrong, including me. He keeps proving me wrong, that's for sure. Tyler Lockett is a guy that's so similar to Keenan Allen for me. He's in his 30s now. Everybody just keeps writing him off and saying this is going to be his season where he drops off. He's been very good already this season. I mean, the guy's already got 2 touchdowns, had a 2-touchdown game, man. I still love Jackson Smith-Njigba long-term this season, but it's not there yet. It's Tyler Lockett time right now in Seattle. We got to capitalize on this right now. DeAndre Hopkins in that matchup against Cleveland in Cleveland. I think DeAndre Hopkins is simply just always going to be on this list as long as he's healthy, just because he's a volume guy. Now, obviously, the volume was less in week 2. He only had 5 targets in that game. DeAndre Hopkins is still going to be their main target in this offense. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins still looked good in week 1 specifically. I don't have any reason to believe that DeAndre Hopkins is not going to be a guy that's going to be able to take advantage of a Cleveland defense that George Pickens just ran all through on Monday Night Football. Nico Collins, man, rising up my rankings week by week by week, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars in Jacksonville this week, man. Last week, it was the first week he cracked my top 30. Nico Collins, well deserved that he cracked my top 30. He was tremendous in week 2. He was absolutely outstanding. He is now the wide receiver 7 in fantasy football right now. You have to play this guy. I mean, based on that, it might feel like this ranking is a little bit low in particular at 23. I think he's going to continue to rise up my rankings, but I also do think it's important to note here that the reason that I have Nico Collins this low still is because of the offense. The offense is not good. But with that said, the guy gets lots and lots of targets, so he's going to continue to be a very good fantasy football option moving forward until something absolutely drastically changes. And I want to see how they play with a lead, and that may not happen this year at all. But Nico Collins, I mean, this guy is going to continue to get tons of targets unless something drastic changes, man. At 24, taking on the Minnesota Vikings in that matchup in Minnesota. Simply put, the defensive matchup it's fantastic. I mean, this is like on par with the Los Angeles Chargers as a passing defense and the Tennessee Titans. This defense cannot defend the pass. He rebounded in week 2, had a very good game. This is another easy pass matchup. You go ahead and play Mike Evans this week for sure. Number 25, DK Metcalf, sitting here at 25, taking on the Carolina Panthers in Seattle this week. Look, this one to me is like, it might feel low, and I'll say this really quick, and we're not going to dive too deep into this. I think DK Metcalf is a little bit overrated in fantasy football. And I've thought that for years now, to be honest with you. Like I said, that's a deeper rabbit hole that we're not going to go down right now, because we could spend a long time talking about that, and we will talk about that another time. But Tyler Lockett is honestly just better in fantasy football. That's just the reality here. Now, the reason that DK Metcalf is going to continue to crack the top 30 is because the guy is just simply an explosive player. If all he needs is 1 touch. And he could he can make a house call. So he's going to continue to be on this list just because of the explosion that he offers. But from a volume perspective, I mean, we're looking at 11 targets through 2 weeks here. This is not that great of a situation for DK Metcalf from a volume perspective. 26, Christian Kirk back inside the top 30 after a week off, taking on the Houston Texans, man. I said it last week. Do not panic on Christian Kirk, man. Do not panic. The reason why you don't panic on Christian Kirk is because we need to follow the money. The money here is with Christian Kirk. He had a $72 million deal that he signed just in 2022 offseason, was really good last year, and he has over half of that contract guaranteed. They're not going to just phase this guy out of the offense, and it proved in week 2. Week 2, he had a great rebound game. Over 10 catches, over 100 yards in this game. This is a situation where Christian Kirk is going to be honestly pretty tough to predict week to week. I really do think that's the case. Because like I said, week 1, he was pretty irrelevant. And I think that a lot of this offense this year is going to be a lot of guys getting more touches than, they did the week prior. Like, I think it's going to be very, very shifty for this offense this week. But this is going to be a guy who's honestly always, to me, going to be a solid flex option week to week. Number 27, Drake London at Detroit this week. We are down in our last tier here. And honestly, Drake London is a guy that I came away from week 1 saying that I was very nervous about Drake London. Like, out of all the goose eggs in week 1, Drake London's goose egg was the most worrisome to me because the volume wasn't there. And honestly, when you look at the volume this week, it still wasn't great. I mean, obviously, he had 7 targets, so that's not bad. But he only has 8 targets through the first 2 games. Like, this is not a superior number in fantasy football. And for that reason alone, I'm worried about his workload week to week. And that's why I can't rank him much higher than this right now in fantasy football. Of course, with the upside the player presents, he's going to be a guy that has lots of good upside in the flex position. But I wouldn't go out of your way to start Drake London week to week. I think this is going to be a situation for Drake London this year where it's going to be like a Michael Pittman situation where he gives you big games and he's a great player. But a lot of times he's just going to be uninvolved and not involved enough. 28, Jerry Jeudy taking on the Miami Dolphins in Miami this week. Obviously, Jerry Jeudy had the disappointing debut. I mean, he came off and he was very disappointing. Only had 5 targets, 25 yards. This guy's still taking time to get back. I mean, he missed a good amount of that last stretch heading into the season. That's an important stretch right there. Everybody's getting back into playing shape, playing preseason games. Jerry Jeudy didn't get to do that. So I think it's going to take him another couple weeks to recover here. I think he's going to be fine, though. Like, this guy is still clearly their best wide receiver option in this offense. I think he'll be fine as a mid to low end wide receiver 2 moving forward. 29, George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Las Vegas Raiders on Sunday night in Vegas this week. This guy finally, I have been begging for it forever, finally had his breakout game in fantasy football 2023. I was so excited to watch it live, crossed 100 yards on Monday Night Football. It was this is a situation where he should always be a 10 target guy, and he finally got 10 targets in this particular game. Only had 4 catches, and you know what? That's the reality with George Pickens. He needs to have at least 10 targets to really give you fantasy upside because Kenny Pickett is not an accurate quarterback. He can't throw the ball very well. So he needs to get hyper targeted to even get 4 catches, 5 catches. But when he does catch the ball, this guy can make anything happen. He's a tremendous player. He's going to continue to be the wide receiver 1 without Deontay Johnson in this offense. He's got good upside. Like I said, just needs those targets consistently. DJ Moore rounding out the top 30, taking on the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City. Obviously, DJ Moore, this offense in Chicago is really disappointing. I mean, we've got a video coming up later today about guys that maybe you should panic on at this point in the season. Justin Fields may or may not be on there. That's all I will say, and I will let you guys watch the rest of the video. But DJ Moore, man, I think that one thing that I liked that I saw in week 2 was that my prediction in week 1, after week 1, was right, which is that the Chicago Bears watched game tape and they realized we didn't get this guy nearly enough targets. He got more targets this week. He got 7 targets in this game, went over 100 yards, because you know what? The guy's a good freaking player. So they need to continue to target him that much, and I do think that they will, because he's really their best shot of this offense having any sort of relevance. And as promised, my underdog start of the week, my favorite sleeper start of the week at the wide receiver position, it's Jayden Reed taking on the New Orleans Saints this week in Green Bay. Now, I said it in my waiver wire target video on Monday. Jayden Reed was my favorite pickup of the week. Rookie wide receiver out of Michigan State. I did a Dynasty rookie draft guide over the summer. I love Jayden Reed. Like, he graded out pretty well in my prospect model. The guy's an electric athlete, and he had a 2-touchdown week this past week versus the Atlanta Falcons. Now, obviously, Christian Watson may or may not play. Honestly, I'll tell you this. I think Jayden Reed's going to stay involved in this offense, because when you're a rookie and you have that type of performance, it's really hard for that team to put you back on the bench. You're going to get more playing time. I think Jayden Reed looked like he was ready for it, and I like this matchup. Don't love the matchup against New Orleans specifically defensively, but I think that Jordan Love is going to continue to do well, and I do think that Jayden Reed is going to continue to capitalize. So let me know what you think of these rankings in the comments below, and what kind of questions you need answered before Week 3 Fantasy Football. And if you want to see some buy low trade targets to get before Week 3 Fantasy Football, click on this video right here.